where the creative mind meets the clinical world. And if you've ever thought about medical coding as a career, it's not just about numbers, it is quite complex. But today, I want to give you more of a personal story of how I got into this field and maybe just a little history about me. So, welcome back. Okay, we're going to get very personal. I do have notes, so you're going to see me look away simply because I cannot remember everything that I want to say. So I just want to let you know that up front. So there are many people who work in this field who have far greater skills than me, a much better video presence and speaking skills than me. But what I offer is something unique. So before I somehow found myself working in this field about 10 years ago, I had a whole other kind of life, a completely different idea or dream for the future that did not include doing this for a job. None of it included the work I do now. And to give you a little backstory, and I'll be as brief as I can, I've been a musician all of my life. I gave piano and violin lessons for about 20 years, starting around the age of 13 when I taught my very first piano student. I'm also someone who creates some very interesting art pieces. Not sure what you would call them except for maybe mixed media. And maybe one day I will share some of the mixed media art that I've created. I've dabbled in photography for years. I do have some um, photographic landscapes of area around where I live. And I have some actually blown up and put into frames, and they are on the walls of my home. Um, Most importantly, I think I just absolutely love storytelling, which is the whole reason that I started a channel in the first place, is I just like to tell stories. So my biggest secret dream career as a child was to either become a well-known music composer and or a worldwide best-selling author. So my world was completely inundated by colors and sound and light and shadows, context and words. So what happened? How did I end up here working in the medical coding field? Because I typically do not belong. So first we need to ask the question, did I become a well-known music composer? No. Did I become a best-selling author? No, I am an author, but I'm not a best-selling author. And we can talk about that later too. But what I became was something I had never hoped for, couldn't imagine for myself, not even considered. I became a mom. And in fact, I had 3 kids by the age of 30. So having children definitely caused me to make choices in life that I would have not otherwise chosen. But I found myself needing to give up my dreams, at least for a while, and I needed to make money. It's as simple as I can possibly state it. I needed to make money and I needed to make it as fast as I could to financially support 3 growing boys. And let me tell you, that cost a lot of money. So I stumbled into medical coding almost by accident. A family member was taking medical coding classes through AAPC. This was back in 2009. And one day she and I had a conversation about it on the phone. I'd never heard of AAPC and I didn't have a clue what medical coding was, but I did have some experience working in the medical billing office, and every so often I would work part time through a staffing agency when my sons were younger. So To give you a little context, my husband worked long hours and in constant travel with his job. But sometimes things would slow down for a few weeks or so, so that's when I would go to work. So I had some exposure to healthcare, but I really didn't know what I was doing beyond the very basic parts of my job. And to be honest, I really wasn't that interested anyway. It was just a paycheck. Um, I really hated working and billing, but for some reason I could understand it. So I did really well. It seems like the only jobs I could get were working in follow up for claim denials or collections, and that meant calling patients about their bills, calling insurance companies, wondering why they didn't pay a claim, writing appeal letters. I got really good at that. Something though about that conversation with my family member talking about medical coding, it intrigued me. So, reading charts, assigning numbers and letters to the text, well, didn't seem too bad. So I looked it up online. I found AAPC's website and I discovered that I could take the classes completely online, even back in 2009. The end goal was, as far as I could tell, was to take the course, pass the exam, and get a job with a steady paycheck. And then eventually, my ultimate goal was I wanted to work from home. So I had three boys. So the medical course cost around $1,500 back then in 2009. And as fate would have it, this was right around the time that we received an income tax return check. So I took part of that money and I paid for the course. And it was a very rough year. A lot of things happened in my life that year. But I did finish the course. I passed the certification exam on the first attempt, and I was absolutely shocked. I did not expect that to happen, but it did. So I started looking for a job. This was 2009. There were hardly any places, especially around here, where you could get a job working remote. So I started going and looking for a place to work on site. I had several interviews, countless conversations with people, and the first thing they would say is, "Wow, you passed that test. That's awesome. But we need somebody with at least 2 years' experience." Okay, so I kind of accepted that answer the first time, the second time, the third time, and then it started to irritate me. And long story short, I ended up letting my certification expire, could not find a job beyond working through a staffing agency for a few weeks, and no one would hire me. It seemed hopeless, and I felt like I had wasted my time and my money. So I let it expire. And I moved on in my life, and I was so upset by the whole thing that I actually sold every medical book that I had. I started doing some other things. I opened an Etsy shop and an eBay store, and I gave music lessons again. And I just did whatever I needed to do to make the extra money that we needed as a family. And it worked out for several years. And then my kids got older and they didn't need me to be home so much anymore. I still needed to be there, but not quite as urgently as before. So I started looking again, what could I possibly do? And then that's the next part of our story. So stay tuned. So we're going to fast forward a few years, and now we're coming up on 2015. So my kids were older. I needed to go to work full time at this point, and I needed to get some further education. At this point in my life, I had a high school education. That was pretty much it. So I took a course to become a clinical medical assistant. I went to classes at a local university for a little less than a year, passed the exam, and then I got a job. I started working for a hematology oncologist physician. So he's a cancer doctor, basically. And I worked there as a clinical staff member. I roomed patients, took their vital signs. I did all kinds of things. I mean, well, if you've ever been to your doctor's office and you know that first person who comes and calls out your name and takes you back and weighs you and gets your blood pressure reading and all that kind of stuff, that was me. So I did that for a while, and then my mom got sick. So when she got a terminal cancer diagnosis, I quit my job and I took care of her. I was basically her nurse until she passed. So about 6 weeks later, I I had to go back to work. Like most everybody else, I have bills. So I applied for a job at a local hospital system in their corporate billing office. And the craziest thing, I got to tell you this. So in the interview, the lady who interviewed me asked me, why did I want to work there? Why didn't I go back and work for the doctor that I had previously worked for? And I told her, I said, well, my mother just passed away 5 weeks ago from cancer. I can't imagine going back and working for yet, working with more cancer patients. I just want a mind numbing job to get my mind off everything. And she said, well, if you want a mind numbing job, you've came to the right place. I left out of there and I was absolutely for sure that there was no way they were going to hire me. By the time I drove home, I got a phone call from HR offering me the job. So I was completely honest, and that was crazy that I got that job. Um, so, long story short about that job, it was brutal. It was mind numbing. It was exactly what I had thought medical billing was since I had worked in it a few years before. But I worked there, I did very well. And I was talking to a coworker one day, and I was looking for a way to move up or move out or do something different. And the monotony was driving me crazy. And so she said to me, well, you know what? The whole reason you have your job is the person who had your job previous to you, they went to work in the coding department and they're making all kinds of money. And I was like, I used to be a certified coder. She was like, well, what are you doing here? So I had thought about it. I called AAPC and they were like, yes, you absolutely will have to retake the test again because you let it expire. That big certification test. It's 5 hours and 40 minutes at the time. That's what it was. So I did that. I also purchased a study guide and practice tests. And I took them over and over and over and over and over again. In fact, I took them so much that I actually started to memorize the answers. And then I scheduled the certification exam and I took it and I passed again. So I took that stupid exam twice and I passed it for a second time. I don't know how. I really don't. I'm just as shocked as anybody else, but I did. And so then we're going to pause for just a minute. And when I come back, I'm going to tell you the rest. Okay, so here's the last part of the story that I'm going to share today. So one day at work, after I had passed my second certification test, so now I'm a certified professional coder apprentice, and I started looking for a job. I had some interviews, but then I decided, you know what? I already work at this place. I am going to call HR and just ask and see if they can help me get a job. So that's what I did. I reached out to an HR rep at the place where I worked, told her what I was looking for. I had had the certification. Did she know of any department or manager who would be hiring? And so she said, well, give me a day or two and I'll get back with you. I really didn't think she would get back with me. I thought she was just brushing me off. But a couple days later, she called me back and she said, hey, I sent your resume to one of the coding managers. She should be calling you soon. A couple days later, got a phone call from the coding manager. She called me up, invited me for an interview. Awesome. I get up that morning. I go to work all day long. I get off at 4:30. Then I drive over to do my interview. And I walk in the door and she says, "Okay, I got to tell you, April, before I can do the interview, you're going to have to take a pre employment coding assessment. And you have to score at least an 80 or I can't hire you." And I'm like, "What? Oh my gosh. Did she forget to tell me that on the phone when she called me for the interview?" I racked my brain. I was like, "No, there's no way she told me that." So I was like, "Okay, sink or swim, right?" So she handed me a set of coding books. She showed me a desk and she said, "Here's I think it's like 20 questions or something." I took almost an hour doing that test. She came out and checked on me 2 or 3 times, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm taking too long. This is not good. I've probably already failed it because I'm too slow." So I finally get done. I hand it in to her, and she says, then we have our interview, and she says, "Okay, I'm going to grade your exam. I'll let you know something as soon as I can." And I said, "Okay, thank you." And she said, "But if you don't score at least an 80, I can't move forward in the hiring process." So I was so I was like, oh my gosh, all these feelings came flooding back from back in 2009. It's like, did I do this for nothing again? Did I waste all this money and time and effort again? So I got in my car and I am heading home, and I'm like just crying while I'm driving because I am just so exhausted and I'm feeling like a huge failure. And I get about 15 minutes until it's time, until I arrive at my home. And I got a phone call, and she called me and she said, "Hey, I want to let you know you passed. I didn't want you to worry about it all weekend. I just wanted to let you know that you passed, and I'm going to go ahead and contact HR and tell them I want to move forward in hiring you." And so I was so shocked. I pulled over. I was driving on the interstate highway. I pulled over. And I asked her again. I said, I just confirmed everything she had said to me, and I couldn't believe it, but I actually got offered a job. And so it took a lot of effort. This spanned over several years, but I got the job and I started about 2 weeks later. And I'm still working in the field. I do not work for that company anymore, and I haven't for a while. And maybe that'll be something I share in another video. But it is possible. I had to hustle. I had to be creative in my approach of how to get that job. I had to be bold enough to reach out to people and put myself out there. And more importantly, I had to be persistent and not accept a no. And then it finally worked out. So thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of this. Please feel free to comment, and I will answer you as soon as I can. Take care.